Hi, everyone. I like to think that we have like the most existential panel. Like, we're here to talk about how I guess none of us are going to have jobs in 10 years. I'm a journalist, so I'm just used to being disrupted. I know that none of you are like paying for your news, but at least some people are paying for the Bloomberg terminal, so that's good for me. Maybe just to kick off, like, could you guys like in one sentence just talk about like what do you actually do all day?
Do you want to go first? Sure. Well, I don't know if it's about what I do or what our company does, but so I'm with Cohere. We're the leading secure AI for enterprise company in the world, and so there are a handful, 6 companies that create foundational AI tech from scratch, not taking someone else's and playing with a little bit. The other 5 are all primarily focused on consumer. It's OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, Gemini, and X. Yes, they say we'll do some things in business, but that's like my former employer, Google, is incredible at consumer. Google Search is the most incredible product in history. Maybe the wheel, fire, and penicillin are pretty good too. But 3.3 billion users of Google Search. What have they done on enterprise search? Precisely 0. Because enterprise, different to SaaS, consumer, billions of users who use the same generic thing, is like building to building combat. You need to go into each enterprise, each government department, and help them find needles in haystacks. Every haystack is different. Everyone's looking for different needles. And so that's what we focus on. And when I say secure, 90% of what we do is private deployment. And so it's not essential for everyone. A lot of people are happy using generic capabilities like a ChatGPT that 500 million people use, exactly the same. Like we use Gmail. It's great, but so does your competitor. And so for critical infrastructure sectors, generally highly regulated, like financial services, like healthcare, like government, like national intelligence, energy, utilities, et cetera, data privacy and security, especially these days with sovereign AI, is extremely important. And so we ship our tech to the data environment of our customers. And so it goes into their data environment and is as secure as anything in that environment, which is just fundamentally different to all of our competitors who have taken billions of dollars from their hyperscalers in exchange for being exclusive to those hyperscalers. So OpenAI is great, but you can only get it on Azure, at least until 2030. Anthropic is fantastic tech. You can only get it through AWS or Google because they took billions of dollars. We're on every cloud, VPC all the way to on-prem and air-gapped on-prem, as well as being hardware agnostic, not just NVIDIA, but we also have AMD as an investor, and we deploy there, as well as Cerebras and Grok. And so for companies like yours, in critical infrastructure sectors where data security is absolutely paramount, that is what we've built our entire business around.
Ronit.
That was a very long sentence.
It was. It's called a run-on sentence.
That was a very long sentence. There were sort of gaps.
That's how we do it in Canada.
I love it. I love it. So my name is Ronit, and what do I do all day? It's a very good question. Most of my friends do ask me, what do I do all day? There are some in the audience who can probably fill in the gaps. More seriously, I run a think tank for Citi called Citi Institute Future of Finance, and I'm paid to investigate, learn, read, write about where money in finance is going to. In December, my team and I sat down and wrote our second deep dive into how AI is going to change financial services. And it was all about agentic AI, and I guess that's why I got asked to join industry experts like Martin on the stage. What we look at is not how does the technology work, though we can try in an amateurish way talk about that. We look at how is the technology implemented and how does it change our industry of banking, finance, investment management. Because what we do in finance, and I've been in finance almost 30 years now, what we do in finance is basically move ones and zeros data. And data, information, we're white-collar factories. This should be ripe for transformation with AI and other emerging technologies beyond AI. So it's a super interesting area for us. And Bloomberg is probably my biggest subscription. So you guys are in the money, so don't complain. It's probably my biggest expense on media, so well done, Bloomberg, for having a moat.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think maybe just to start off, some definitions are helpful here, because I'm sure there are some of you in the audience who are thinking, you just barely learned about what generative AI is, and now the new buzzword is agentic AI. So could we just talk a little bit about what is agentic AI, and how is that different from just Gen AI?
Sure. Should I go first? Or? So AI is basically software or a machine that imitates a human, right? So generative AI is show it for me, agentic AI is do it for me. There's a longer, much more nuanced debate about exactly what is an agent and what is an agentic AI system. And you can get into all kinds. If you're a lawyer or a philosopher or a humanities graduate, you can get into all kinds of kind of definitional discussions. But it's basically a smart bot which is doing, learning, doing. And agentic AI is lots of these agents working together in a system. And it's different to what we've had so far. We are beginning to see it in practice, and I'm sure Martin will talk about it in much more details, but we're beginning to see it in practice in workflows, including in treasury optimization and treasury automation. So it's going much faster than I expected 6 months ago. I thought this year it'd be science project and proof of concept land, but we're beginning to see many of our particularly corporate, non-financial clients put this into action quite fast.
Yeah, I used to be a consultant for an embarrassingly long time, 23 years, so I learned to be self-deprecating. I'll be a bit provocative and say that agentic AI is the latest buzzword that everyone just finds replaces on their LinkedIn posts, where it used to be Gen AI, and before that it was metaverse, before that NFTs, before that crypto, I guess maybe still is, AR, VR. So I think there's a couple of different definitional things that are important to point out. Even Gen AI is a misnomer. And so, yes, there are generative models. Those are the ones that do the conversation. They generate text. They just basically predict the next character in a flow, and they're very, very good at that. Our flagship command A is actually for agentic, but it actually outperforms DeepSeek v3, including in Chinese, amusingly, and GPT-4o. But it actually requires 1/4 or 1/8 the compute power. No one really talks about efficiency. It's always these, can you play Pokemon, or how good do you write poetry? But the point is, if you want to deploy at production at massive scale, you need to think about how can you even afford to do that. And so the amount of compute that you need to run these models is incredibly important. Of course, if you're owned by your hyperscaler, you have kind of a perverse disinterest or disincentive to become more efficient, because you're basically a reselling vehicle for your owners. But that's the generative side. What people don't talk about, which we believe is as important, if not more important, are representation models. And that's for search and retrieval. And so embedding models, re-rankers, Cohere, and it's not me, so I can say this, but we are objectively the best in the world at that. Our head of search, Nils Reimers in Germany, invented sentence transformers. Patrick Lewis is the chap who coined the phrase RAG. He was the lead author on that paper when he was at Meta. He's with us. And so the representation models are the ones that allow you to search and retrieve, find needles in haystacks. Some of our peers don't have zero search capabilities. In fact, amusingly, they will put on their blogs that to do a really good RAG pipeline, you should use Cohere re-rankers. But we believe in being vertically integrated. So the generative models that are optimized to run efficiently and very effectively with search and retrieval models that enable you, linked up to all of your data sources, very importantly to my first point, inside your data environment, which means it can have all your PII, your HIPAA, your health information, your high net worth individuals, all of your finance information, your Salesforce, all of that, things that you would never in a billion years put through an API to a public chatbot, have all of that together that enables you to access all that hidden knowledge in your company. And if you can do that before your competitors, you create alpha. And that's what we really want to help our partners and customers do. And so back to your question, we've always believed there's sort of a 3-step progression. The first thing, and it's foundational, these build on each other, you can't just skip one, is you need incredible search and retrieval capabilities. RAG capabilities. You've got to have something that it really knows, just like a human brain. We're not Jeopardy contestants. We don't stuff our brains full of every fact that we might be asked today. That's what some think about, building bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger models, make them like Jeopardy contestants. That's not intelligent at all. What's intelligent is, like us as humans, we've learned how, where, when to look for information that we don't have in our heads, retrieve that, synthesize it, create a point of view, present that, and most importantly, cite where those things are from. And that's exactly what our technology does. It knows how, where, when to look for information. It doesn't have in its parametric knowledge. Too sensitive, too unwieldy. It might have been updated 4 seconds ago, and therefore wouldn't be in some model training run from 2 months ago. And then cites where each individual component is from. It's very important. That's the first step. The second step is models are not very good, LLMs are not very good at math, for example. So some companies say, we're going to teach you to be better at math, make it bigger, trillions of parameters, which, by the way, then you cannot serve, it's too expensive. We say, that's silly. I don't use a piece of paper to figure out the square root of 976.5. I use a calculator. So we just teach our models to use a calculator, use a Python interpreter, use a mail program. It's called tool use. That's the second step, is how you do tool use. The third step is then agents, and agents is basically about automating tasks where instead of giving instructions, they actually will do this and automate, I'll say menial tasks. But it's the third step in a progression, and unless you've built an incredible capability for RAG, for tool use, jumping all the way ahead because every conference talks about agents, so suddenly your company is an agent expert, is silly. It's like saying, Google search is good, I'm going to make a search engine. Like, you don't just start there. And there are two components or two areas that we see this happening. And you mentioned some that there are innovative companies that are deploying this in production at scale. One is for augmentation. We're deploying this across everything that RBC does, as an example, for a company in your sector in banking, North for Banking, which is going to enable them to have not just an agent or 2 agents, but we deploy North, which is our platform that brings all those components together inside their data environment, approved by their 14 risk departments, that's no joke, plus the federal regulator, so that now their 91,000 employees can create their own agents with no code. Literally no code. You just sort of configure your agent because it's already connected to all your data sources, it's already approved in your data environment. So it's a little bit like a GPT store inside your company. The other is automation. So we're working with a revenue cycle management company right now in healthcare, but you could imagine the same thing for any of the processes you talked about, where it's not about how many seats you can augment to make us all better at our jobs, like Google Search did, but rather you're automating full processes. In one case, it's 40%, and the other it's 25%. The idea is this would, or the commitment, we have fees at risk, would be 100 million of OI to the bottom line. It's a private equity-owned company. They want to exit in a year, 2 years. That's probably $1 billion of value that's created within 6 months. And so I think those are very active elements that are at play right now. We also power everything Oracle does in AI, Fusion, NetSuite, 105 plus features built into workflow. So is that an agent? Is it not an agent? It's just, it helps you auto-generate job descriptions. It helps you go through 10,000 CVs. It just makes your job easier and better on the augmentation side, while others are focusing on the automation side.
And Ken and Ronit, in finance in particular, what are the obstacles of adopting this technology?
Sure. Just to pick up on what Martin said, so what you're talking about is an ALM or a model, a task, and some form of automation, right? Or autonomy, automation. And it's that last bit that becomes really hard. But even before we get to the last bit, there's a foundational problem, which is data. So 14 risk groups, and I was thinking, wow, that's a small number for a big bank. So one of the challenges is fragmentation inside our institutions. Any financial institution, it doesn't have to be as large as ours. There's a huge amount of fragmentation of data and processes. And so for this to work, for agentic AI or AI in action to work, we need to have some, and it's no pun intended, but some coherence in the data, because that's our biggest native problem. The other huge problem is I think you called it menial, maybe we could call it repetitive tasks without offending anyone in our middle office or our, a lot of repetitive tasks should be automatable. But the problem is how much autonomy do you want to give these agents? Because at the end of the day, the board of the bank or the regulators, to use a wonderful line that a very senior US regulator said in a closed-door meeting, which is still stuck in my head. We were talking about this in January last year, somewhere in Central Europe near a mountain, and she goes, AI, we're discussing how to implement AI in financial services, and she goes, this is all great, but I still want a throat to choke. Your models, you can come and tell me your model is going to get rid of or either augment or substitute X number of employees or FTEs. I still want a throat to choke. So if you're in that kind of senior management layer, that's your biggest challenge. Because not so much your models, but AI in general still makes mistakes. They're getting better at a tremendous rate, but they hallucinate. You probably heard this said to you in the last couple of years. They're like me 25 or 30 years ago. Supremely arrogant, cocky, but not really very experienced. Like most finance young professionals, like I was in the mid-1990s. That's what AI is. It makes mistakes. And do you want to let your junior analyst or associate out there without control? Now, of course, errors are coming down, but those are our biggest challenges of implementing it. But we do see, in particularly lower risk tasks, lots of opportunities. So in asset managers, when we surveyed asset managers and investment managers, we see some reluctance in classic, investment process tasks to utilize either AI in general or agentic AI, but in middle office and back office tasks, there's a huge amount of experimentation and even production going on in terms of operationalizing back office flows or client relationship management, contact points. That's where we're seeing the most amount of work being done. But the challenge is error rates and this responsibility point.
Can I pick up on that in a second? Because I don't disagree with you at all that generative models make errors. But I'll make an analogy here. That's like a Jeopardy contestant or a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire contestant will make errors.
Yeah.
But if that person had access to Google search and a library and everything, they wouldn't make errors. That's the difference of what we do. And so all the articles, all the talk about all these great models is how good is the model is basically treating it like a Jeopardy contestant. You pack it full of knowledge and hope it gives a good answer. And I use the analogy sometimes. It's a bit like, is this Chatham House Rules? I think it is. It's not. It's a bit like.
I don't know whether you organize.
It's a bit like.
Just go for it.
It's a bit like your belligerent uncle, let's say, not. I was going to use a different word, but who always knows the answer to everything at Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. And the thing is, you don't know whether he's right or wrong because he speaks with equal conviction all the time. LLMs are like that. But that's why we've put as much, if not more, focus on search and retrieval, because then that simply isn't the case. If you say, I need to know, I've got a meeting coming up, I need to know, have a perspective on Bolivian bauxite mining. I have no idea if there's bauxite in Bolivia, but bear with me.
Someone check that.
It'll make something up and it'll say, and you're like, maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong. But if you're actually going and finding a Slack exchange between two Japanese analysts in Japanese about, South American mining, if you find a panel like this with a transcript, you find a Slack exchange, you find emails, you find reports inside your data environment, and you bring those back, our search and retrieval works across 109 languages, and synthesize that, and then cite where it's from, and you can hover over it or click on it and see, oh, that's the transcript from the video chat. That's what our treasurer said last Tuesday. You can then say, this, you can decide whether or not you want to base it on your treasurer's perspectives, but you know where it's from, and it's just a fundamentally different approach that we believe is essential for enterprise. If you're trying to find a cocktail recipe for your upcoming party, fine, you can use a public chatbot, that's fine. But if you're trying to figure out what advice to give a high net worth individual, you're certainly not going to base it on that. And that's why I think it's a lot of the press, a lot of the hyperbole, including some of the hyperbole around mine's bigger than yours, I have 100,000 GPUs, I have 200,000 GPUs, I have 500,000 GPUs, AGI, we have 2 trillion parameters, 8 trillion. All of that is hyperbole that doesn't result in any value for enterprise. It just simply does not. And you've seen lately that the latest Llama release was, maybe not what they were hoping. Same with GPT-4.5, and this pursuit of ever more compute power, ever bigger models, AGI is just simply not relevant for business or government uses to be productive, to be impactful in production. And I think we've shown that. We've raised just shy of $1 billion, which is still eye-watering in my eyes. But as I said, we perform at the same or higher levels as those other models. But for inference, for actually serving them, deploying them in production, we use literally a fraction, a quarter or an eighth of the compute, because we want to minimize the TCO, the total cost of ownership, to deploy at production and scale. And so I think it's if you start every day thinking about what enterprise needs, what business needs, what government departments need, how you solve problems, to your point, what's the task, what's the problem, what's the solution, you go about it a very different way than if you get up every day saying, I want a headline about AGI, and big numbers and FOMO and lots of capital thinking we need to bet on the one with the most money or the most GPUs. A little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially given a lot of the investors are the hyperscalers themselves, who then get the money back to pay for the compute. So I think I would really encourage people to think, what are the business problems you're trying to solve, and what's the best solution? Not what are the, dare I say, somewhat hyperbolic headlines that we read about, it seems like every week someone has to multiply by 10 the thing that their competitor said last week. Now we have $1 billion, now we have 10 billion, now we have 100 billion, and it just sort of keeps going.
Well, you have to raise capital, so. But the agentic AI.
Well,
I'm not saying you do, but
that's my point. Is
maybe
you have
Sam
to raise capital, to what
so,
end? It seems like it's almost raising capital to raise capital, to raise more capital, to show you have more capital, as opposed to we have a business plan. This is what our customers need. This is how we're going to create value, and we need people to fund it. And so that's why I think, I personally believe it's maybe gotten a little bit out of hand.
Also, agentic AI in practice for us in finance is kind of dull and boring. And if you focus on dull and boring, we can actually create value here, because we're not going to replace our middle office or our client function or our CRM function, but we can augment. And it's not so much agentic AI, but Gen AI. Just think about in research functions, in my old job, and I'm still sort of in a research function, I used to have teams of 10 and 20 before, when I ran financial research for Citi. Initially, we had 20 years ago, almost 20 people sitting in London. About 15 years ago, someone came, probably from McKinsey or somewhere, and said, hey, you got all these smart kids in India who'll do the job for a fifth of the price or a tenth of the price. So we offshored all our juniors. And then about 15 years ago, we woke up and goes, oh my God, we don't have any pipeline left in London of talent. They're all sitting in India. Now, some of them can be brought over from India, but not all of them want to leave India. So in a way, agentic AI is just the next stage. Anything we offshored or outsourced, whether it was writing credit memos, most credit memos in corporate banks, in large institutions in the UK or the US that are global, ones that start with a C or a J or an H or whatever, where do they get written? They don't get written in a tower in Canary Wharf or in Wall Street. The credit memo is being written somewhere in Buffalo or in Manila or Hyderabad or Pune or Mumbai. Actually, not Mumbai anymore, it's getting expensive. But that whatever we outsourced or offshored internally 10, 15 years ago is ripe to be partially, if not completely, replaced by AI, including agentic AI in our, because a lot of that, the originating, the deal banker doesn't need to, he doesn't worry about it, or she doesn't worry about it today anyway. So whatever we push, and just like we had the talent pipeline problem 10, 15 years ago, we could have the same issue if we offshore or replace offshoring with agentic AI. So that it's, for me, conceptually from a business perspective, it looks kind of similar. But we can have augmentation and much smaller teams. My team is, I hope my bosses aren't listening to this, but my team is 4 people, including me, based in Dubai and London. I feel my productivity in the last year or so is equivalent to having a 8 or 12-person team, because AI does actually add value, but it's not going to replace my team. I hope not, anyway. But, so from an augmentation perspective, it's huge. It also raises all kinds of challenges in because most of what we do, we call it sort of thinking work or creative work or white-collar work. And actually a lot of what we do is, particularly in large financial institutions or elite ones on the buy side, is a lot of information summarization. Oftentimes, they don't even get read. Those 100-page pitch decks that you give to your clients, and even the buy side has, you all have clients, right? All of that content. So, some associates creating that content. I assume your clients will get a model to read it now. But all of that content it's almost like a form. That creation gets replaced by AI. So I do think the teams will be much smaller, leaner. It will have an impact.
Great. I can't believe we're kind of out of time.
You've only had a chance to ask 3 questions,
I know,
right? I know.
right? Maybe just to summarize, so is agentic AI overhyped or not?
How much capital do you need to raise?
Not as much as the other people. We just focus on creating value. I think the cheeky answer is absolutely, because everyone just keeps find replace.
Because we're here talking about it.
Everything's agentic, and no one really knows what that means. I think the underlying transformation, absolutely not. I think what we're seeing now is the biggest disruption and transformation in the human-computer interface in 30 years, since the Mosaic browser came out in 1993. And for those of us who were around at that time, everything changed. Everything. Every job, every company, every service provider, everything. And if you were quick to put into production, not death by 1,000 POCs. If you're still doing POCs, you're dead. You're dead. You need to do things in production at scale and be forced to do all the yucky stuff to figure out how to deploy the 14 risk departments. How much compute do you need? Where's it going to be? All these kind of things. How do you build the connectors to your data sources, et cetera, et cetera. I'll leave one framework that I think could be a little bit helpful. I certainly find it helpful when people say, well, isn't OpenAI going to do that? Well, why wouldn't Google do it? And I say, yes, they absolutely will. Just like there's room for hyperscalers and Databricks and Snowflake, et cetera. But it's a bit like a hierarchy of needs. And the widest level of that, at the bottom, are the mass market use cases and features that billions of us will use 10, 20, 50 times an hour. And they'll be incredibly well served by Google and Microsoft. They'll be built into 365, built into Workspace. I don't think anyone here is financing an autocomplete app or a spell check company. It's just built into the stuff we use every day. We're a Google shop, and so if we have a Google Meets, we'll use Google to summarize the action items from that meeting. We're not going to build that app ourselves. That's silly. Why? Everyone's going to pay a few bucks more. I think we already are. And my old boss, Ruth, is happy because they're making tens of billions of dollars of OI based on that. Wonderful. A lot of these companies that built a sort of a wrapper around other people's models, I think are going to be very challenged because all this stuff's just going to be built into that productivity software. We don't compete there. We even use that stuff, 100%. If you want to auto-generate an email, it'll be in Gmail. It'll be in Outlook. The next layer up, though, is all the SaaS capabilities that are deployed in every company in the world. Bloomberg, we heard about, Experian, SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, et cetera. Several of those are investors in us. They will build and are building those capabilities into what they do. So as I said, we power everything Oracle does in AI. If auto-generating JDs in their human capital management SaaS, you don't need to build that yourself. It'll be done. So if you want to automate back office processes for HR, for finance, a lot of that's going to be built into this to the services you already procure. They'll charge a bit more, whatever, but that'll be there. What you should be thinking about is, and that's what we think about, is the top of that hierarchy of needs. And those are the mission-critical core capabilities of an individual company that ideally gives it alpha. And that's where you don't want to just outsource your loan decisions or your IPO pricing to some app on the web or some chatbot. You want that to be proprietary with your data, your experience, create something customized and configured to give your company alpha. And that's where we focus with companies like RBC or Fujitsu in Japan, who has objectively the best AI capabilities in the Japanese market, powered by Cohere. They call it Takane. We're doing that with LG in Korea, with STC in Saudi. It was actually just announced yesterday, our deep partnership with Dell. And that's where we want to help these companies have alpha for the top of that hierarchy of needs. In no way does that compete with the mass market, generic, not in a bad way generic, stuff that we're going to use that'll just be built into 365 or so on. So you should think not about how do I automate, looking through CVs. Others will do that for you. But it's how do you create alpha with your unique capabilities, data, and experience.
Ronit, in one word, overhyped or not?
One word. He got a whole novel. I get one word. I'll go for a really long sentence. How about that, with pauses and commas? No, I'll be quick. So it all goes back to where you started this conversation about definitions. If you think about agentic AI as some kind of AGI or ASI, of course it's overhyped because we can't give it full autonomy, particularly anything to do with financial services. But if you think about it somewhere in the middle as a semi-autonomous system, as a kind of augmentation system, we are basically in finance, when you look at headcount, big financial services organizations in the UK typically have 80,000 plus employees. Think about the big banks. In America, it's anywhere between 200 and 300,000 employees. Look at what the headcount, what the people do. And it's not all compliant in HR. There's a huge amount of ops and tech. At least half of that headcount is some form of ops and tech, if not more. And most of them are ops rather than tech. That's a huge, huge automation upside. Now, whether we call it agentic AI or not, I don't know, but there is a huge upside there. It won't happen in a year or two because of regulation and also culture in these organizations, but over 5-10 years, it could be transformative. Just look at our own organizations on the investment side. Look at how many humans we used to have on the trading floor shouting at each other 30 years ago when I started my career at Salomon Brothers, to date myself. How many humans would sit on that trading floor in Victoria Plaza and scream at each other and have an MD title and even back then 7-figure, 8-figure salaries? Where are they now? Technology did replace them. So short-term, overestimated, long-term, usually underestimated. Sorry, that was not one word, but...
Good enough. Please join me in thank you, Martin and Ronit, for this great discussion.